Frances Aldrich had been proposed to 7 times. She did not count them the way a woman counts a thing she is proud of, but the way a woman counts a thing she is trying to understand, which is carefully and without conclusion. The first had been when she was 19, from a man who had loved her genuinely and whom she had not loved back, and she had said no and felt the particular difficulty of saying no to something real. The second had been at 22, from a man who had loved what he thought she was, which was not the same as loving her, and the saying no had been easier than the first, but had cost its own kind of something. The third and fourth had come in her middle 20s, and had both been from men who wanted the Aldrich name and the Aldrich land, and had found Frances attached to both, and the saying no to those had been the easiest of all, because there was nothing in them that required her to mean it carefully. The fifth had been the hardest, from a man she had wanted to say yes to, and had not been able to, because she had known something about who he would become in 20 years, and had trusted the knowing over the wanting, and had been right about the 20 years, and had not found it comforting to be right. The sixth and seventh had come in her early 30s, from men who were good men, and whose proposals had been genuine, and who she had refused, not because they were wrong, but because she had begun to understand, by the sixth, what she was waiting for, which she could not have named, but could have recognized, if it walked through the door. She was 36 years old, and she had been running the Aldrich property since her father's death 3 years prior, which was 280 acres in the Sulphur Creek Valley that ran cattle and a small grain operation, and had an orchard on the North Hill that she had been improving since she was 16. She had made the Aldrich property into the best operation it had been in 3 generations, which most people in Sulphur Creek understood, and which some of them were uncomfortable with, for reasons that were never quite stated, but were always present in the room. She was not waiting for a proposal. She had had 7 proposals, and had said no to all of them, and had made a kind of peace with the possibility that she would say no to all the proposals that came, not because the right man would not come, but because she did not trust the proposal as a measurement of the right man, which was a distinction she had not made cleanly until the 6th, and had been making with precision since. A proposal, she had come to understand, was a question that contained its own pressure, and the pressure changed the shape of the answer in ways that were not always honest, and she had been honest in all 7 of her answers, and had found the honesty expensive, and had decided it was worth the expense. She was running the Aldrich property, and she was running it well, and she had what she needed, and she was not doing anyone a disservice by being where she was. She was at the Sulphur Creek Grain Exchange on a Thursday in September when she met Nathan Ware. She met him because he was in front of her in the line at the exchange window, and because there was a dispute about his account, a clerical error in the settlement record from the previous quarter, and he was explaining the error to the clerk with the patient precision of someone who has been through this kind of error before and has learned that patience is faster than frustration. She could see the account sheet from where she stood, and she could see the error, and she said so. He turned. She said the carry from column 4 was missing from the totals line, and pointed to where it would have been, and the clerk looked and found it, and the settlement was corrected. He thanked her. She said it was a common error in that form. He said he had thought so. He said his name. She said hers. He looked at her with the direct attention of someone taking accurate note rather than forming an impression, and then he thanked her again and stepped away from the window, and she went to the window and concluded her own business. She did not see him again for 2 weeks, when he came to the Aldrich property on a Tuesday morning about a shared drainage concern on the east boundary, which he managed through a parcel adjacent to her land. He came with a survey and a question rather than a position, which she found she had not expected, and which told her something about him before he had finished the question. They walked the east boundary together, and she showed him where the drainage ran under her fence line, and he showed her where it came out on his side, and they agreed on what needed doing, and on who would do which part of it and when, and the conversation took 45 minutes and was entirely practical, and she found it to be the best conversation she had had in the valley that year, which was not a small thing, and which she did not say. He came back in October to report that his portion of the drainage work was done, and she said hers was done also, and they stood at the boundary fence for a moment in the October air, with nothing further that needed saying about the drainage. The October air in Sulphur Creek had a quality she had liked since she was a child, cold and specific, and the valley below them was in its fall colors, which were not spectacular in the valley the way they were in the hills, but was still a version of the thing. She said, the Ware parcel ran alfalfa. He said it had for 3 seasons. She said she had tried alfalfa on the south section 6 years ago, and the water table had been too variable. He said the east parcel had a clay lens that held it steadier. She said she had noticed that from the road. He said he had wondered if she had. There was something in the wondering, the fact that he had looked at her land from his side of the boundary and had thought about what she might have noticed from hers. That was different from the usual quality of conversation at a fence line, and she received it without naming it. Neither of them said anything further for a moment, and then she said she had to get back, and he said of course, and she went back, and the October morning went on, and she stood at the south section of her property an hour later, looking at the ground and thinking about clay lenses, not in any extended or examined way, just the way the mind circles something it has filed and is not yet ready to open. The winters in Sulphur Creek brought the valley into its smallest version of itself, and the people in it saw each other at the grain exchange and the hardware and the church on Sundays. And she saw Nathan Ware at most of these occasions, in the way you see a person when a valley is small enough that the paths of competent people cross regularly. He did not seek out the crossings. He was simply present at the places that required presence, and he was present the same way in all of them, without making more of a thing than it was, and without making less. She had been watching him since September, the same way she had told him in December she had been watching, and what she had found was consistent enough to be significant, which was that his attention was even. He paid the same kind of attention to a conversation about drainage that he paid to a conversation about grain pricing or the quality of the season's alfalfa, and the attention was always about the thing itself and not about how he appeared to be attending to it. She had met men who were attentive and men who performed attentiveness, and the difference between the two was visible if you were paying a particular kind of attention yourself, and she was. She found herself in the same pew 3 Sundays in a row, which was the kind of thing that happened in a small valley church and did not mean anything on its own, and which on the 3rd Sunday had produced a conversation about the east boundary drainage through the winter, which had been adequate, and about his sister, who had come from the Eastern Territory for November and was staying through Christmas, and about a minor point of contention at the grain exchange that he had the same view of that she did, which was that the clerk's method of calculating moisture penalty was inconsistent and favored the exchange in ways that compound over multiple settlements. She had been saying this for 2 years, and it had not landed anywhere. He said he had been raising it for a year. She said, I know. He looked at her. She said she had heard him say it at the October meeting, and had thought he was right. He said, you didn't say so at the meeting. She said, no. He said, why not? She said, because I had been saying it for longer, and I wanted to see what you would do with it. He looked at the church steps. He said, I take the point, she said, the point being that I was watching you. He said he understood that. He said, what did you find? She said, he had been persistent and accurate and had not required her agreement to keep going. He nodded. He said, and now you're telling me. She said, now I'm telling you. The December air was cold enough that their breath showed when they spoke, and the valley below the church steps was the grey-brown of winter fields, and she could see the Aldrich North Orchard from where they stood, which was a row of bare trees on the hill, and she had looked at those trees from above and below and from the road for 20 years, and she looked at them now. He said, thank you for that. They had walked down to the road together, and she had driven home, and the December valley had been the same valley it always was in December, and something in the quality of the afternoon was different from the quality it had been in October, and she could not have said in what precise way, except that it was different in the way a thing is different when you have been watching it long enough to see it change. A woman named Catherine Venn came to the Aldrich property in January. She came with the warm and organized concern that was Catherine's mode of engagement with the world, and she said she had heard that Francis had been spending time with Nathan Ware, and she wanted Francis to know what people were saying about it. Francis was at the kitchen table with the account book, and she set the pen down and looked at the table. She said, "What are people saying?" Catherine said they were saying the Ware parcel and the Aldrich property had obvious economies of scale, and that there was an obvious and practical solution, and that people were wondering why the obvious solution had not presented itself yet. She said it with the particular warmth of someone saying a thing they believe they are helping with. Francis looked at the account book. She said, "What is the obvious solution they have in mind?" Catherine said, "A match." Francis said, "A proposal, you mean?" Catherine said yes. Francis picked up the pen. She said, "Nathan Ware has not proposed to me." Catherine said, "No, I know, but it seems like—" Francis said, "I have been proposed to 7 times. She said it the way you say something that is simply factual. I said no to all 7. Catherine looked at her hands. She said, "I didn't know that." Francis said, "There's no reason you would." She said she appreciated Catherine's visit, and she set the pen to the accounts, and Catherine, who was not a foolish woman, understood the shape of the conversation, and said her goodbyes and left. Francis wrote 3 account entries, and then set the pen down, and looked at the window, and thought about 7 proposals, and about what she had been waiting for through all 7, and about the fact that she had now told Nathan Ware, in the conversation on the church steps, that she had been watching him, and what she had found, which was the closest she had come to saying the thing she had been not saying for 3 months, and about the fact that he had said thank you, and had not made it into more than it was, or asked her to make it into more, which was itself an answer to the question she had been asking for a long time, and had not known how to phrase. She had been asking it since the 5th proposal, the hard one, the one she had wanted to say yes to, and had not been able to. What she had been asking was, what would it look like when the watching went both directions, and neither person needed to make an announcement about it, and when the answer was already present in the pattern, before the question was asked. She had been asking it for 11 years, and she recognized it now, and she looked at the account book and the window and the orchard on the hill, and went back to the entries. She told him in February, not in the way of a woman confessing something, but in the way of a woman who has decided that accurate information should be shared with the person it concerns. She told him at the east boundary fence, where they had gone to check the drainage repair through the winter, and the repair had held, and the creek was running correctly, and there was nothing further that needed discussing about the drainage. And she said, "I told Catherine Venn in January that I had been proposed to 7 times. He was looking at the creek. He turned. She said, "I said it as a fact." He said he understood that. She said, "I have been waiting for something since the first proposal that I could not have described at the time, and that I could not describe now, except by what it is not. And it is not a proposal, and it is not a man who is certain enough of the outcome to ask." He looked at her across the fence. She said, "What it is a man who finds me worth watching, the way I found him worth watching, and who would not need to ask, because the watching has already done what a proposal is supposed to do." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I've been watching you since September." She said she knew. He said, "I know you know." She said, "Then," he said, "then I won't ask." She looked at him. The February boundary fence was the same fence it had always been, and the creek ran below it the same as it had in October and November, and the clay lens on his parcel was doing what the clay lens did, which was hold the water steadier than her south section could, and none of this had changed, and all of it was present in the morning. He said, "I would like to stay at this fence and keep watching, and to have dinner on Thursday, and to see where the watching goes." He said it plainly, without making a proposal out of it, and without making it into less than it was, which was the thing she had been waiting for through 7 proposals, and 1 decade, and 280 acres of land she had run better than any man in the valley, and which nobody had managed to see clearly, until this man with the adjacent parcel, and the clay lens, and the wrong carry in his settlement record, had looked at her at the grain exchange window and taken accurate note. She stood at the boundary fence with the February cold on both of them, and the creek running correctly below, and the valley going about its business in all directions, and she understood that she was standing in the thing she had been waiting for, and it had arrived without asking, and without needing her to answer. She said, "Thursday is fine." He said, "Good." He looked at the creek once more. The drainage was holding, and the winter was doing what winter did in February in Sulphur Creek, which was nothing that required further attention from either of them. They walked back from the boundary fence together, and the February valley was grey and still and entirely indifferent, and neither of them had proposed anything, and neither of them had needed to. The spring came on, and the seasons moved through the valley the way seasons move through a working valley, with the kind of purposefulness that does not ask anyone's permission. The Thursday dinners became a pattern that neither of them announced, and the east boundary drainage became a thing they checked together in the spring and the fall, and the grain exchange moisture penalty became a thing they raised jointly at the quarterly meetings, and they were better together in those meetings than they had been separately, because they had the same view of the situation and arrived at the same conclusions by different routes, and the double approach was harder to dismiss than either one alone had been. The clerk's calculation changed in the third quarter, which neither of them mentioned to the other, because both of them had known it would eventually, and there was nothing to say about a thing that had been true for long enough. She found that the Thursday dinners were the measure of the week, which was to say, she understood the quality of a week by how the Thursday felt at the end of it, which was different from how it had been before the Thursdays, and she noted this without making it into a statement, because it did not require a statement, because it was simply accurate, and accurate things did not always require announcement. He was at the Aldrich property on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when she was checking the North Orchard, which was in its second year of expanded planting, and he had come about a seed variety question and had ended up in the orchard, because that was where she was, and they had talked through the variety question, and then they had stopped talking and stood in the orchard in the October light, and the orchard was doing what she had been working for it to do for 20 years, which was demonstrate what proper management looked like when you gave it enough time. He said, "The orchard is the best thing on this property." She said, "The cattle returns are higher." He said, "I know." He looked at the orchard. He said, "I mean it's the best thing about it." She looked at the trees. She said, "I know what you mean." He said, "I would like to be here for the next 20 years of it." He said it the way he said everything, without decoration, and then he turned and looked at her and said, "As your husband, if you'd want that." Not asking in the way of a man proposing, telling her what he wanted, and leaving the rest of it to her. She looked at him. She looked at the orchard. She thought about 7 proposals and about what had been wrong with each of them, and about a man who had said, "I won't ask in February," and had then spent 8 months doing exactly what he said he would do, which was watching and being worth watching in return. And she thought about the October light on the North Orchard, and about the clay lens on the East Parcel, and about grain exchange meetings and East Boundary drainage and Thursday dinners, and about what the watching had done, which was the thing she had said in February that a proposal was supposed to do, and which this had. She thought about the 5th proposal, the hard one, and about what she had known about who that man would become in 20 years, and she looked at this man in the October orchard and understood what she knew about who he would become, and found it to be what she wanted to be beside for the 20 years. She said yes. That was what she wanted. He put his hand out, and she took it, and the orchard was quiet around them, and the October light was doing what October light does, which is make everything look like exactly what it is, and the orchard looked like 20 years of work that had been worth doing and was not finished, and she was in it, and so was he. They married in April, in the Sulphur Creek Church, where they had sat in the same pew 3 Sundays in a row and talked about drainage and grain exchange penalties, and the minister was brief because they had asked him to be, and the valley came to the wedding because it was a small valley, and the valley came to things. The North Orchard was not yet in leaf in April, but it was showing what it was going to do, which was what the orchard always showed in April, which was the beginning of the evidence. She counted the marriage as 8, because it seemed accurate to count it, even though it had not been a question. The accuracy was what mattered to her, and it had not been a proposal in the way the other 7 had been proposals, and it had been something she had chosen more completely than any choosing she had done before, which was perhaps why it seemed right to count it separately from the others, not as the 8th proposal, but as the first answer that had been entirely hers. The east boundary drainage held through the next winter, and the alfalfa on his parcel had its best year in 4 seasons, and the grain exchange moisture calculation ran clean, and the Thursday dinners continued and became what the week was measured by for both of them, and the North Orchard came into its 21st year in the April of their second spring together, and it looked exactly like what 21 years of proper management looked like in April, which was the kind of quiet abundance that does not announce itself, and does not need to. And that was the story of Francis, who was proposed to 7 times, and said no to all 7, and who finally said yes to the man who understood that some answers don't require a question. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.